This time we're going to make a handy little pouch that can clip onto your waistband or onto a dog lead and take with you when you're going out dog walking. Because on this side you can keep your poo bags in the little pocket there and feed them through the buttonhole. And on this side there's plenty of room inside here to put maybe your loose change or your mobile or cell phone. Now I've made this quite large because I want it to fit my phone. If you just wanted it for your poo bags and maybe some change, you can make a smaller version. So this one's 6 inches across, this one's 8 inches across. Also on this one I've added a grommet or an eyelet. On this one I've chosen a buttonhole because not everybody has these in their stash, so that might make it a little bit easier. And of course if you wanted to elongate the handle and make it into a wristlet or even a shoulder strap, then that's entirely up to you. But this is the basics of how you're going to make it, and this is what you need. So I have 2 pieces of fabric, each measuring 8 inches across, 6 inches down. That's lining fabric. For the front of the pouch, or the zip side, these are 8 inches by 1.5 inches, 8 inches by 4.5 inches, and for the flap section at the back, 8 inches by 4.5 inches, 8 inches by 3.5 inches. And I will put all of those measurements in inches and in centimetres in the description box underneath the video. Now on the wrong side of each one of the outer pieces, I've just put some G700, which is a Vleseline interfacing, to give the bag a little bit more stability. So it's not too thick and padded, but it is quite nice and stable. I've also got my zip, and the flap I've fastened over with some hook and loop fastening. Now this is quite nice actually, because it's got the fluff on one side and it's got the hooks on the other side, all on one roll. But if you're going to use something like Velcro, that's absolutely fine. If you find it's a little bit too wide and chunky, then just cut it straight down the middle so you've got a thin strip. Okay, let's get going. So the first thing I'm going to do is to sew the zip in. So let's move these to one side. And I'm going to sew right sides together, one outer piece to the zip, and then put the lining on the opposite side. So let's sew from the zip side so I can see where I'm going. I'm going to move the needle on my machine to the left hand side by using the stitch width button. So if you've got a computerized sewing machine, you've probably got that feature as well. And that means I don't need to put the zipper foot on my sewing machine. And then the second side of the lining is going to go on the opposite side of the zip. And I like to sew from the same side so I can see where my stitches are. So let's line up the edges of the fabric here. And we'll sew straight down. And then the second part of the pocket goes on the opposite side of the zip. Right sides together again, so from the zip side so I can see it. Make sure if you have a directional fabric that your fabric is facing in the right direction. And then we'll sew. And then the second lining piece on the opposite side of the zip, and again sew from the side where you can see the stitches, so straight over the top of that same stitch line. And then I'll just take my iron and press the fabric away from the zip. And then I'm going to top stitch along each side of the zip. So I can put my foot back to the centre again. And so. Then I'm just going to open up my zip and sew across the end to hold that together, because when we construct the bag, that'll make it a lot easier because the zip's going to be open. Then let's just snip off the ends of the zip, and we can put that to one side for now. Don't worry about these edge bits here not lining up perfectly, because we can trim this down afterwards. Sometimes it moves a little bit, but that's nothing to worry about. Okay, let's do the pocket with the buttonhole. So we'll take the two sections like so, put them right sides together, and we're going to sew across the top of this one and the bottom of this one. And then we'll give that a quick press again before we top stitch. So fold this in half so that the seam is right on the edge. And we'll give that a press. If your fabric feels as though it's fighting back a little bit, or it's not very crisp, then give it a spray of something like Best Press, or some kind of starter, or even maybe dampen it with water, and that'll help to keep it under control. Let's press this one open. And again, we'll just give that a quick spray. Then I'm going to top stitch down the seam on both sides. And then we're going to fit either the eyelet or the buttonhole, so that's entirely up to you. If you're going to fit the eyelet, then follow the manufacturer's instructions, and we'll fit that to the bottom half of the bag. I'm going to do a buttonhole though, because as I said earlier, most people will have a buttonhole feature on their sewing machine. You may not have a packet of eyelets to use. So what I like to do is to have a practice first on a piece of scrap material, and that's going to help me position the buttonhole in exactly the right place. That'll make sense in just a minute. So let me take my buttonhole foot, and we're going to make it quite a large buttonhole, I think. So this is on its widest. So we'll pop this onto the machine. This is a one-step buttonhole foot. You may have a four-step buttonhole foot, depends on the style of your machine, but if you have a computerized machine, you should have one of these. So let me show you how this works. Let's drop this foot off and pop this foot on. And on computerized machines, you will have a buttonhole lever which you'll need to pull down, and that needs to sit in between these 2 points. So if you haven't used a buttonhole foot before, this is actually a lot simpler than you would imagine. So as you're sewing the buttonhole, this is a sensor, so as you go back and it touches the second bar, then it'll turn around and come back in the right direction. So I'm just going to pop my fabric underneath here, choose my buttonhole stitch, which is number 18 on this machine, and then we'll sew. So again, on a computerized sewing machine, there's nothing actually for me to do. I put my foot down, it'll start sewing backwards, do a bar tack at the end, and then zigzag forwards again. And the reason it does that, a couple of reasons. The straight stitch down the centre is going to help strengthen the buttonhole, and it means that the zigzag stitches are facing in the same direction. So if you've got a fabric with a pile on, it flattens the pile in the same direction. When you've finished sewing the buttonhole on a computerized machine, your machine will automatically stop, like that. And then I can snip the thread and take the buttonhole out. Now I'm actually going to cut this out, which may seem a little odd, but this is how I like to do it, particularly when I'm fitting a buttonhole to something like this where it needs to be central. So it may be a bag flap where you want the buttonhole to be right in the middle. Sometimes you can't gauge exactly how big that buttonhole is going to be. So what I've done here, I'm just going to crease the center of my fabric, and then 1.5 inches from the bottom, I'm going to crease the center of my buttonhole as well, is where I'm going to place my buttonhole. So now I know exactly the size of the buttonhole. I can put a mark where the buttonhole starts sewing, so just here. So when I put my buttonhole foot here, I know that it's going to sit perfectly in the center. So let's line this up again. So where's my mark? There we go. That goes underneath the hole in the buttonhole foot, and then we'll sew. So there's my perfect little buttonhole. I can take this foot back off again, put that away, and put my standard foot back on again. Then I'll take my scissors. You need a sharp pair of scissors or your quick unpick, and we're simply going to snip down the center of the buttonhole. Be careful not to snip through the stitches, else it'll look like your buttonhole has a fringe. There we go. Now let's put the one-touch fastening on. So I'm just going to cut a couple of lengths, maybe about 3 inches long. And I'm going to take one of the lining pieces from the back and just lay this over the top so I know that I've got the overlap in the right position. And I'm going to stick this on with a glue stick for now. So I'll need one fluffy side and one spiky side. So I know that's going to go in the center here. Measure that to make it perfectly central if you wish, but I can kind of gauge that by eye. And then I know the second half, I'm just going to put a mark on here as well, it needs to go here. Okay. And that's going to put the right lid on. That's going to be spiky side up. And we'll just sew those in position. So again, this doesn't have to be Velcro or one-touch fastening. It could be a magnetic clasp. You could do a button and a buttonhole, or you could do something like add a little piece of elastic to wrap around a button, like a hair bungee, that kind of thing. But I think because it's quite a wide pouch, you will need something to close this over, because otherwise the pocket's going to gape a little bit and you could risk things falling out, which we don't want. Right, so those two pieces now should sit perfectly over the lining. Oops, come here. There we go. Just going to snip off these little threads here, make it neat. And then we'll start assembling this. I need to make a little loop for the hook to go into. So this is my 4x3 piece of fabric. Let's give that a spray actually to make it nice and firm. So I'm just going to crease the centre and fold the edges to the centre. The reason I've used a piece of fabric that is 3 inches by 4 inches is because it makes a finished piece just the right size for my hook. So if you've got a bigger hook, maybe a 1-inch hook, you'll need a wider strap. You could even, if you wanted to, if you've got a smaller hook, use a piece of ribbon, so you don't have to actually make the strap. I'm just going to sew down both sides and we'll pop that in place. Remember, that can be any size that you like, so if you wanted it longer so you can actually put your wrist through it, then make it as long as you like. So this threads through my snap. Just going to trim off the loose ends, and I'm going to have that, the zip open, facing inwards about 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from the corner there. It doesn't have to be exact, but around about that much. And I'm just sewing that within the seam allowance just to hold it in place. Right, let's start putting all this together. We're almost finished. So front section and my back section are going to go right sides together. Again, don't worry about these edges not being perfect. I'm just going to stick a pin in there and sew about 3 inches across the bottom, so just across here. Then I'm going to put one lining piece on top of here, flip it over, make sure the zip's open, and we're going to put a second lining piece on top of here. And then we're going to sew all the way around apart from where that gap was, or where that stitch line was that I left at the bottom there. So I'm going to pop a couple of pins in to hold all of the layers together. It's quite thick at this point, there's quite a few layers of fabric. So let me just see where that stitch line was here, and we'll go all the way around. Right, now I'm going to trim these seams back a little bit. And snip across the corners just to cut down on the bulk. Whoops, there we go. Put that out of the way. And then we'll turn the whole thing the right side out. Okay, so we'll need to do this twice. I've got a turning gap in the bottom here, which will need to be sewn by hand. So I'll do that now. Now I've got white thread in my needle. I'd normally use red, or the same colour as the fabric, but at least you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to use a ladder stitch, which is, I know we've seen this lots of times before, but it's a very useful stitch to use. So when you pull the two sides open, the edges just want to fall together or fold in. So I'm just going to take the needle from one side to the other like so. Smaller stitches are more invisible generally and a stronger seam, but this is the inside of the bag, so it doesn't really matter. Let's do this, keep sewing. So we'll just do a few stitches like this, and then every so often just give those a pull and they should just disappear. And again, so this is a great stitch if you are making toys, because you're going to have a turning gap or somewhere where you stuff the toy that you need to close invisibly. If you have a tear in a seam or a split seam, and a garment, this is perfect for that. If you are making handbags, and again you'll have a turning gap there, and you just want the seam to be invisible, this is great. Now I know this is on the inside of a dog treat bag, so don't worry too much about your stitches being absolutely perfect. No one's going to see it, but this may be a gift, or it may be something that you're going to sell, in which case I think it's quite important to have these finishing touches. So let's just knot off the end of the thread here and snip and turn this through. Now depending which way you turned it, you'll have another gap to sew closed as well. So when I turn my bag out this way and push out my corners with the right tool, have a look inside the second pocket and there'll be another hole that you need to close over. So if you just take a look inside the flap here, there's another little turning up right at the bottom. And then we're ready to go for a walk. So again, on this side, plenty of room to pop my mobile phone. Maybe it's loose change, something that you don't want it to fall out. Your house keys, whatever it is you're taking with you when you go for a walk. And on this side is where you're going to pop your poo bags. So, oops, let me just find mine. There we go. So your roll of poo bags goes in here. There's plenty of room actually, and that's going to pop out through the hole here. So when you close that over, you can just pull those out as you need them. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you find this really useful actually. Adapt it, like I said previously, to lengthwise of the strap and size-wise for you. Make it a lot smaller if you wanted to, make it bigger if you wanted to as well. But the most important thing is that I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope you enjoy making yours. I shall see you again soon. Bye-bye.